Thank you, sir. Meet Dr. Audrey Gusky. She's to my immediate left. She is a marketing professor from Duquesne. She's here to help us discuss negative advertising. And, of course, Jerry Boyer of the Allegheny Institute, who knows how to throw negative slings and arrows and has done that a time or two, principally back in the old Plan A and Plan B days. Let's take a look at two of our favorite negative ads from the campaign. The candidates beat the negative ads to death. We're going to beat the negative ad discussion to death, just to keep in step with the candidates. Here is one from Mike DeWita. Two things notable about this one. You may notice the misspelling. They wanted to say public record. They instead said pubic record.
See, I think campaigns are too personal, and I think that's evidence of that.
Absolutely.
I think someone's pubic record is irrelevant to their job as chief executive.
And also, there is a picture of a house in Florida. It is portrayed. Well, take a look.
Zero Wecht doesn't lie. Wecht pocketed over $250,000. The public record on Cyril Wecht doesn't lie. Wecht pocketed over The public record on Cyril Wecht doesn't lie. Wecht pocketed over $250,000. The public record on Cyril Wecht doesn't lie. Wecht pocketed over.
Yes, it's the repetitive factor. That was so effective in the campaign. They just said one thing over and over again. Frankly, that was a technical difficulty beyond our control.
Hypnotism.
But it also had a house in Florida, as I started to say. It was pictured in the TV ad. It actually was not Dr. Wecht's house in Florida. But before we get to any specifics of that, Dr. Gusky, why do negative ads work? Why are they so effective? Why do candidates keep running them?
They work extremely well. What they found is that people tend to believe the negative information more so than the positive information. It tends to decrease our evaluation of the particular candidate that's being viewed in a poor light, and it really has very little effect on the person who's advertising. So even though we complain and we moan and groan and we hate those particular commercials because we believe that they're unethical, immoral, they're annoying, and yet they do tend to work.
Yeah, kind of like the candidates. But why is it, do you suppose? I guess it's because we've heard...
They don't tend to work.
Right.
That's the only difference.
But we've heard so many political speeches, I guess, where people say, I'm going to lead us into a new day and the sun will shine and the birds will sing and all the children will come running back to Pittsburgh. And we all know that's a bunch of BS. So I guess is that why we're inclined to believe the negative? Because the positive sounds so ridiculous, and you know that's what they're going to say. I mean, who's going to say, I'm going to, run us into the toilet, vote for me?
Well, it tends to draw our attention more so. Some ads that's more controversial, something that's suggesting very negative things about the particular candidate is going to really be something we remember. If you think about even just products that we have out there and their TV commercials, which ones do we remember? We remember the bad ones, the ones that give us fear, the ones that are very negative. And so it's the same way with political advertising. We don't like them, but that's the ones we remember, that's the ones we believe, because if it's on TV, it's got to be real. And so it seems like it's a credible source, credible information. And as viewers, as voters, a lot of times we believe it.
But don't you both think that they're also a big turnoff to a lot of voters? Or at least that's what a lot of the politicians sitting around the table earlier were saying.
They claim it's a turnoff. If you have very educated, very informed, very savvy voters who know the issues and are very involved, chances are they're probably going to vote by issues. But the majority of people...
We don't have many of those, do we?
No.
Exactly. The
That's
majority
why all the negative ads here on PCNC tend to run for the other crowd.
Tend to work very well. So,
John, I think voters are rational for the most part, and I think that they're more willing to believe negative ads because I think generally negative ads are more likely to be true. Quite frankly, I think that when you go after someone on a negative basis, it's something you're expected to document more. Usually, negative ads are more specific than positive ads. Positive ads are, I'm a great guy, I'm going to lead us into the 21st century. That's not very specific and difficult to evaluate. A negative ad like Cyril Wecht cuts out pituitaries and sells them, that's pretty darn specific, and I think people tend to take them more seriously. People take accusations more seriously because people are less apt to make them unless they can back them up. I'm not saying that they're all true.
and obviously more shock value involved.
And there's shock value,
which is going to get our attention
sears itself in your memory.
Well, speaking of shock value, I believe we have the ad queued up, if I'm not mistaken, which we do not have the ad which what I'm talking about is Larry Dunn, which as you all know was portrayed to look more or less like a gopher on Quaaludes. If you've ever given Quaaludes to the gophers in your backyard, you know how disturbing that can be.
Fall asleep. Yeah.
What did you say, Dick? I'm sorry. Oh, we'll have that in a moment, I believe. That was shock value, I suppose, just because it had sort of disturbing music behind it and had an unusual... in fact, let's just take a look at it our own selves. Here it is.
There are two Republican candidates for county executive, Jim Roddy and Larry Dunn. Jim Roddy's been a respected small businessman who has a plan to revitalize our economy and lower our taxes. Larry Dunn has been a county commissioner for 10 years, during which we've lost jobs and become one of the highest taxed counties in the country. Jim Roddy has the vision and energy we need to lead Allegheny County into the next century. As for Larry Dunn, you decide.
Now, see, people are in the studio are chuckling, and I don't blame them because it's humorous.
It was humorous. It was very degrading, obviously, and it worked. It was very effective, and it seemed like people remembered that particular ad, and they discussed it a lot among their friends, and it's the one that maybe swayed voters a little bit.
And he is the one getting the stuffings pounded out of him tonight, so apparently if there's any voter backlash, it was minimal, to say the least.
Well, the ad didn't run for long, and Dunn has done more negative advertising against Roddy. I mean, I think that ad may have been a mistake, and I think that's why it got yanked so early. I mean, there's kind of sort of two levels. One is it's pointing out that Larry Dunn falls asleep at meetings and public functions. I think that's relevant.
Ronald Reagan used to do that. Nobody got on his case.
Ronald Reagan fell asleep
with the Pope, wasn't it?
Well, Reagan biographers question whether Ronald Reagan fell asleep or whether he was in pensive thought. But we'll never
that's
know.
What Larry Dunn says.
We'll never know. But yeah, but he falls asleep, and everyone who's.
How do you know he wasn't thinking pensive, heavy thoughts?
Because I've sat in meetings where Larry Dunn fell asleep. I mean, it's just as simple as that.
Well, that's because you were in the meeting.
I put people to sleep, exactly. But the other part that I didn't like about that ad was I really thought it was inaccurate or at least misleading. It said, you know, he was a county commissioner for 10 years, during which we had, you know, some of the highest taxes in America. Well, it's true that he was a county commissioner, and it's true that we have some of the highest property taxes in America, but he voted against all those tax increases. So despite the fact that I think Roddy's run a good campaign, generally a clean campaign, and an accurate one, I thought that one, you know, really didn't.
So that doesn't come across because as you're watching it, you believe what they're saying, and there's a lot of implications there. Yes, exactly.
And actually, literally, technically, we haven't lost jobs. There are more jobs in Allegheny County now than there were 10 years ago. We just have had relatively slow growth of jobs.
It's so hard to keep track of all that because, you know, Tom Flaherty said there were 30,000 more, and then oopsie daisy, there's only like 10 or 13,000
Right, which is slow growth.
Yeah.
That's why we have think tanks. They go look into those numbers. So that was a misleading ad.
All right, let's take a look at the ad we were going to take a look at earlier, which is the one of the Mike DeWitt attack ads against Cyril Wecht. Here it is.
The public record on Cyril Wecht doesn't lie. Wecht pocketed over $250,000 from us, and 2 judges ordered Wecht to pay up. For 10 years, Wecht refused to take responsibility and admitted sheltering his assets.
Well, they couldn't collect because everything's in my wife's name and mine.
While Wecht made us wait for our money, he gave us the ultimate slap in the face. Bought a $360,000 home in Boca Raton, Florida. Now Wecht wants to be county executive. Is he serious?
I won!
Yeah, and if all else fails, just give the people at home lots of cash. That'll tend to get them to vote for you.
Once again, he was portrayed very negatively. You look at his face, he looks like a criminal. The image that, you know...
More than usual.
The subliminal things that are happening, things going over top of things, people talking, and just a little bit of confusion. And as you said, the home being shown, I think all of that added together adds some confusion.
How can, and by the way, I appreciate your criticism of the Larry Dunn ad, since you're actually a supporter of Jim Roddy, and it was the Roddy campaign that put that out.
Yeah. Well,
so a moment of candor and honesty from Jerry Boyer.
There'll be more. I mean, you got to call him honestly, but I will also say he didn't run it for very long.
Right. Well, right. There was a public outcry, and he yanked it because he's not stupid.
But that's where to start it with negative ads, because normally they come later on as the campaign boils down to the last couple of days.
Right.
And also if you're sort of losing some kind of what they call traction and you need to get back into the race, people will do that.
Now, I'll say that some of the Dunn ads against Roddy were very misleading, too. Like, for instance, you know, he's raising your sewer rates. Well, the plan that's raising the sewer rates was put together when you have the previous chairman who was a Dunn appointee. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff flying around that
misleading,
isn't really
but not
accurate.
blatantly inaccurate. And I think you would both agree that blatantly inaccurate is saying Cyril bought a house in Boca Raton and showing somebody else's house, some other Florida house. It wasn't his house in Boca Raton.
But you wouldn't know that to see it.
No.
And obviously...
They shouldn't have shown the
How is that?
the house. They left themselves vulnerable, and frankly, the house didn't do that much for it. I mean, you know, I mean, the ad would have been fine without it, and they left themselves open to a counterpunch.
But in the last 30 seconds of our segment, I guess, is it fair to say, ladies and gentlemen, that we're stuck with this? It's not going anywhere. Negative campaigning will be with us as long as politics are with us.
I think absolutely, because it is effective. It's been shown to be effective. They wouldn't be using it if it didn't work, and I think, unfortunately, it's here for the duration. I'm anxious to see when we get to the future, though, and we start more direct mail, more technologies being used, that I think it's going to probably even get worse.
John, I don't object to negative ads. I object to misleading or irrelevant ads. Positive and negative information is both useful.
Well, let's send it back over. Thank you very much to Bill Green and David Johnson.